Hello again, and welcome to another edition of Mastermind Minutes. My name is Gary Occhiogrosso. I am the founder and managing partner here at Franchise Growth Solutions, which we believe is the leading franchise development and franchise sales organization in North America. I'm also the publisher of FranchiseMoneymaker.com, an online magazine for those of you interested in franchising, whether as a franchisee or a franchisor. There's plenty of information and great learning up there. And if you're new to Mastermind Minutes, it's a very simple concept. We have one expert guest. We ask one question or have one topic, and we try to wrap this up in 15, 20, 25 minutes. So it's minutes, not hours. And that's basically the format and the theme. And today, my guest is Jesse Kaiser, who graduated from the Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. Now, while attending college, he joined a small tech startup and stayed with them until about 2005. He'll tell us about that a little later on. That's when he and his brother actually opened their first of 5 Little Caesars pizza locations, all of which they've since sold. He was a Valpak franchisee back in 2008, 2011. And in 2010, he and his brother opened their first sports clip haircuts franchise, and they currently own 27 of them across 5 states, and they have plans to acquire more and grow some more. In 2014, they purchased an Oxy fresh carpet cleaning franchise in St. Louis, and they now own and operate in 6 different territories. And he serves on the advisory council for Little Caesars, Oxy Fresh Carpet Cleaning, and Sports Clip. He's been a Sports Clip Owner of the Year, Franchise Owner of the Year, as well as an Oxy Fresh Carpet Cleaning Owner of the Year. He currently serves, by the way, as the chairman of this year's Franchise Update Media 2024 Multi-Unit Franchise Conference. And he's also the secretary at the IFA, at the International Franchise Association's Franchisee Forum. So a busy guy into a lot of things. Jesse, before we get into the question, maybe there's some blanks you want to fill in there. Tell us about what you're doing, your background, and some of these companies you're involved with
Sure.
on the franchise side.
You got my bio pretty accurate. The only other thing is in the last 18 months, when we sold our Little Caesars, we took that money and we rolled it into a joint ventureship with Ideal Image Medical Spas. So it's not a franchise. It looks more like a hotel management agreement where we own the building, we own the employees, we own the equipment, but we're paying corporate to actually manage and run the employees and the marketing.
Very cool. Very, very cool. And where is that located? What market did you say?
We've got those in 5 states, anywhere from California, Nebraska, Michigan, Kentucky, and Louisiana.
All right. Well, okay. So I think it's pretty obvious to our audience, whether you're listening and you're a franchisor or a franchisee or an entrepreneur looking at franchising, Jesse has achieved a certain status in the franchise world, what we would refer to as a multi-unit, multi-brand franchisee. Different from the single unit owner operator or the operator that might own 2 or 3 units of the same brand. And it's all sort of a progression and an evolution. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So, Jesse, why don't we start with maybe you tell us your story and when did it first dawn on you about doing multiple brands and the motivation and what does someone need to do? I know there's a couple of questions here. What does a franchisee need to do in order to position themselves to become multi-unit and then eventually multi-brand?
Yeah, I can tell you the dream from day one was to be multi-unit, not necessarily multi-brand, but I'm in business partners with my brother. And, when you are looking at a franchise, you get to hopefully look at a pro forma and you can realize what the average location makes. And quite honestly, I had an amazing paying job for someone in my early 20s. And it was going to take a couple Little Caesars for me and my brother to make the same equivalent of that. So we already knew that, hey, we're going to have to take a pay cut for a while and start opening these up and then get to the point where we could pay ourselves what I was making working for somebody else. So multi-unit was always on the table. Oddly enough, we said we wanted 50 units and we're really close to 50 units now between all the brands. And we still have total intent to grow and be more than that for sure. The multi-brand happened because in our course to open up our first 4 Little Caesars, there really wasn't any more real estate available that wasn't spoken for by another new franchisee that the company had been able to sell and sign up and get into the system. So, and managing food's a lot different than let's say the salons. The salons, I'm in 5 different states. I personally don't need to really go to them very often. It's a data-rich business. I can see what's going on through the POS down to each individual stylist or employee. So I can see what's going on, and I have district managers that come out there. But food, you're going to have a district manager touch that restaurant every week, no matter what, multiple times. And the big reason is that restaurants get dirty, and if they get dirty, it gets sloppy, and if it gets sloppy, sometimes people get sick and could potentially die. So it's a lot different than just getting a bad haircut, as an example, you know. So we got to the point where we couldn't grow anymore, and our first venture was, we were a pretty rural market. We didn't have a lot of marketing options. I mean, we had MS Park or Mail South at the time, mailed once a month in our market, and that was it. So like once a month, we got a shot in the arm for marketing, where you're given like what it is called like a marketing cookbook, where it's like all the guidelines on how to do marketing. Because back then, when we were a franchisee, our advertising rate for Little Caesars, what we had to pay to corporate, was a contribution of a quarter or 0.75%. It wasn't even 1%. And what that translated into was they would pay and do all the creative for us, but it was up to me to place it and do everything. So I had a crash course learning there. And when I did that, I discovered that in other markets, there was this thing called Valpak that I had never heard of. And so I called them up, said, I'd like to open a Valpak in our market. So we opened a Valpak just for the sole purpose of having another option to market our Little Caesars. What was interesting, though, when we talk about multi-brands, it was interesting. I had an advantage over a lot of the other Valpak owners because I had access to what franchisees saw for how creative was done, and how if the corporate would support or be enthusiastic about Valpak or other marketing things, how easy it was to get new artwork, and if they weren't, how it wasn't. So it gave me another, and it also gave me the ability to go and meet with another salesperson, like, hey, I advertise my restaurants in this, and I know you're a franchise, and I know that and here are 4 other franchisees throughout the nation that I can see in the Valpak database that are advertising with us. It's working for them. Here's their numbers. And I understood the power of networking and franchising. So that gave me an advantage on that, right?
Yeah.
That evolution, I started, and most or a lot of the Valpak customer is mom and pop shops. So in the categories of like carpet cleaning and salons, I was calling the local carpet cleaners, I was calling the local salons, and none of them were taking me very serious. Or if I got a carpet cleaner to advertise, as soon as someone quit on his team, he got all emotional about it and decided he was going to pull out all of his marketing. And it was just like, what? You plan on hiring someone? Yeah. Well, I can't advertise till I hire someone. You have interviews this week, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, we deadline tomorrow for next month's mailing. What do you want to do? Because you're going to have this new employee, and you're not going to have all the marketing going out. So I realized that, and that's why I'm in carpet cleaning, and that's why I'm in the salon business. I realized that at least in the area I was at, all the owners of that industry were not very marketing savvy. And I figured if I could do just as good of a job within the 4 walls or the customer service of a carpet cleaning business, and I understood marketing, I was going to win. So that's the multi-brands. And then what was interesting, so my next brand was Sport Clips. And salons, even to this day, salons will open low and grow, right, in popularity and customer volume. Restaurants open up really big, and you hold on for dear life, and you level out at somewhere, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
So, and so my only experience running anything that was brick and mortar was restaurants. We had great grand openings, and so I knew that you have to have a lot of employees, you got to really train them, and you got to spend a lot of money on marketing. And the salons were a little bit lower. Like, it's going to be slow. You don't need to add. There's no reason to have 10 stylists on your roster when you only need 6 in the beginning. So I hired 12. Actually, I got up to 20 at most of my grand openings. And all the marketing that you would do in 6 months, I would do it in the first 4 weeks. and I started breaking all the grand opening records because I took my experience and knowledge that I learned from the restaurant business into the salon business, as an example. So that's another where I keep adding brands, is not because I dislike any of my current brands. It's because every time I pick up a new brand, I learn something new and I bring something new to the industry. So in Sport Clips, their average grand opening volume went up across the nation when they started asking, what are you doing? And I started sharing, I'm like, well, I'm spending more money this week and this week on these things. And then they started saying, hey, you guys need to do this if you want to have successful grand openings. And the whole system went up, right?
Yeah.
Excuse me. So every time I add a brand, I get a new capability, I like to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great story, and there's a lot to unpack there, and it's interesting because where you first started, in speaking there was this realization that you and your brother had good jobs, and if you had one unit, it wasn't going to happen. So you had to embrace this mindset of maybe taking a step back financially and building it quickly, because you needed to get back to at least where you were.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't pay myself for the first 16 months.
Right, right. Now I hear you. When I opened up my Dunkin' many years ago, I don't believe my partner and I took any money out of the place for 4, 5, 6 months. And I think if you don't have that mindset, you're not going anywhere. Because then you have what I call an employee mindset, where you're simply trading time for money and go get a salary and go get a job. So I think that's an answer to the question, how do you elevate? The first thing is you have to embrace the idea that it's hard work and there's some sacrifice along the way in how you get to your goal and having the goal. The other piece is, and correct me if I'm mistaken, but you really verbalized a certain appetite for growth. It didn't just happen. Sometimes the growth almost happens by accident. Hey, we've been doing this for 5 years and there's a good location across town and we'll buy it. Whereas it appears that you had a plan, that you wanted to grow, which speaks to your appetite for growth, but also how you positioned yourself in order to achieve that. And I love the jumping from, how you said, hey, you learned this, then you got the Valpak, and then you went there. So you're building one on top of another. What are some of the things, though, when you look for a new brand? Or when you come upon a brand that you might have interest in, what is it that you're looking at in that brand? Because obviously Valpak didn't have any brand recognition in your market. You never even heard of it.
None of my brands had brand recognition other than Little Caesars. And that brand recognition there was Little Caesars in that community 7 years earlier that went out of business when that brand had an ebb and flow.
Right.
Yes.
Sometimes no brand recognition is better than bad brand
Well,
recognition.
I can tell you, it wasn't just me as a franchisee. Other franchisees, when they were going back into these re-emerging markets, I mean, it was like there was such fantude in the customers, and they said, we missed you. And I just remember my brother and I scratching our heads like, well, if you love this that much, why the heck did this location close 7 years ago?
Exactly.
But I think it was nostalgia. It was like they remember it when they were a child, and at one point they went out of the flavor went out of their profile, and it came back, and at the $5 hot and ready was too appetizing for most people not to at least give it another try.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely. So when you look at a brand, to get back to the question, when you look at a brand, what is it that someone like yourself, multi-unit, multi-brand, experienced, what are the things you're digging into, not just in the FDD, but what are you digging into with respect to the company and its culture, its growth, its vision, its backstory? What are you looking at?
Okay, so let's split this up into one part's financial, one part's not financial.
Okay.
So the first filter is, and if you notice, like restaurants, marketing, carpet cleaning, salons, medical spas, they're completely unrelated. Like a lot of our multi-brand brothers and sisters own 100 units of 5 different food concepts, right?
Correct. Yes.
Nothing wrong with that. But food's food, and you get it. And there's nuances, and that chicken's different than burritos, without a doubt. But nonetheless, it's still food. So I'm successful in all these locations because I get asked this an awful lot and all these different concepts. I won't jump into a brand unless I fully understand 2 things: what the ideal customer looks like and what the ideal employee for that customer looks like.
Makes sense.
So let's use the medical spas as an example. So by law, it needs to be a nurse practitioner that's doing the Botox. Okay. Well, not all nurse practitioners are created equally. Some of them really like working in the ER. Some of them like doing triage. Some of them like working with the elderly. That's not the kind of employee that I need to have in my med spa. I need to have nurse practitioners that get excited about transformation.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So understanding the right employee, and I was just thinking about this. Chick-fil-A has a line down the road at all their locations. Their chicken sandwich is good. It's not arguably the best by any means, but the people that eat at Chick-fil-A don't eat at McDonald's very often. And it's because they found employees that they can relate to and they feel comfortable. It's still fried chicken. It's just as unhealthy as the McChicken,
Absolutely.
But it's all about the employee at Chick-fil-A.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's the right employee matched with the right customer.
Mm-hmm.
So once I understand those 2 components, and if you only understand one of them, you're going to struggle. Okay. So once that, then we're talking about the financial thing. And there's 2 parts to that equation. The first one is, how fast can I make my initial investment back? And that is a time question. The second one is, if it's an existing brand that's established and there's good numbers out there to look at, the average unit volume, if I want to exit, what are the multiples, and are that volume at the 50%, not the 25 or the top 10%, but at half of the the median of the brand? If does that multiple actually get me more money than when it costs to open it? And a lot of brands, that's not the case. And I can tell you, 5 years ago, that wasn't part of the equation. Part of my equation was, how fast can I make my money back? That's always been it, because I understood wealth was a measure of time and not actual money, right? But the other part is the sophistication of, now that I've started to sell some businesses, I realize it's nice to get a nice big paycheck on the end of it, right? Forget
Mm-hmm.
that you owned it for 15 years and you made lots of money on it. Did you make more money selling it than what it cost to open it? And so if you do that, then you can always level up to the next game. Otherwise, you're just kind of selling off an annuity.
Yeah.
And so those are the 2 things. How fast do I make the money back on my initial investment? And then when I want to exit, am I going to make more money on this deal than what it costs to open it?
Yeah.
There's a lot of brands that you can make good money, but the multiples aren't there or the volume is not there. And so that's the second part of my evolution as an entrepreneur. That's my second question.
Yeah. Yeah. And I couldn't agree with you more, because the equity at the end, the kiss at the end, as I call it, is really what it's all about, because the dollars that you're producing while you're there, again, to a certain extent, is directly related to time and work that you're putting in. And the equity is sort of the result of that. So I love that formula and how you look at it. The other part about who's my customer and who is my employee, I think, is key. Not only from the point of view, can you get employees? What's the pool of that sort of employee? But what is your makeup? What's your temperament as an employer as it relates to that level of employee? Setting the tone, setting the culture, having expectations. I can remember when I opened up my Dunkin', I had the wrong expectation of my employees. See, I was so like gung-ho, and I was the business owner, that I thought every 16-year-old kid that I hired, who really only wanted enough money to put gas in their car to take their girlfriend out on a date on Saturday, I thought that they wanted a career in food service.
Right.
So my expectation didn't meet theirs. And I was always disappointed. I was always setting the wrong tone. I was always expecting more than they were even capable of delivering. Forget their desire, but they weren't capable of delivering what I had expected. So I needed to adjust that. So I think that's a very, very important piece. in the overall game. Now, you mentioned about a lot of multi-brand, multi-unit, multi-brand franchisees stay within the same category, and I think that has a lot to do with the employee base, as you mentioned, and the customer base. I know a lot of folks in the restaurant business. It's what we specialize over here at Franchise Growth Solutions, and I can tell you the person that may own, I don't know, pick a number, 15 Burger Kings in a market. All of a sudden, he sees a great location. He can't capitalize on that with a Burger King, but maybe he can open up some other, maybe he can open up a chicken concept there, okay, a chicken franchise there. So he's capitalizing on the real estate, but he also is capitalizing on the understanding that he can switch employees around if he needs to. He's got supply chain. He can control the share of stomach in that market, and that's why they stay in that same category. But I think you're a very unique multi-brand franchisee because you're in those different categories. So do you have certain categories, and you may not know this now because you haven't discovered them, but you might have some that you would never endeavor to go into? Are there certain categories you would just stay away from?
There's franchisors coming up that deal with CBD and marijuana. I just I would open up a restaurant that served alcohol. That's not an issue for me. But I just think the retail side of marijuana is going to look very much like the retail side of liquor in a few short years, and it's going to be a race to the bottom. And if you go into your local, and I'm not talking about the Bennies or the Friar Tucks or whatever, the big corporate ones. I'm talking about the end of it. If you walk in, almost always the owner is the person behind the counter.
Absolutely.
Or a relative of the counter, right? And it's because it's a race to the bottom.
Yeah.
And there's just no margin to have a good manager. There's no margin to have a district manager. So you don't have multiple locations typically.
Yeah. So
I see marijuana on the retail side of it. I think on the distribution side, maybe there's some opportunity. But that's not really what's being franchised. In my understanding, it's more the storefront.
It is. And you are, so spot on. There are several categories or certain brands within several categories where at the end of the day, and if it's what you choose, it's fine. But if it's not, then you find yourself in the dilemma where you've essentially bought yourself a job.
Yeah.
And you got to get up every day. And I, by the way, I grew up in a family business. Like my dad and my uncles, they had pastry shops around New York City, but basically they didn't really have a business. They got up every day, they worked 12 hours a day, 6-7 days a week, and they had a job, a very difficult job to say the least. So okay, so I would say that then categories that are off the table for you are categories that are not scalable to the point where you could have managers and district people operate those businesses. That'd be a fair statement.
I'm very, that for sure, because I'm probably the most ambitious, lazy person you'll ever meet.
I love it. I love it.
I've got a quote that if you want to go somewhere fast, you got to do it alone. But if you want to go somewhere far, you got to do it with others.
Yeah.
And I would never do one location of anything. It just doesn't make sense. By the time you learn by the time you get to genius level, like all your genius is wasted on one location. And, let's just be honest. Let's go back to Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A can only fry so much chicken in one location. That's why they open up other locations in the same city.
Yeah.
So, your genius is wasted at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. Very well said. Very well said. So on the franchisor side, so now, where I sit, again, we do franchise development, and Franchise Growth Solutions does franchise sales. We actually help support emerging brands and startups with infrastructure, building, everything from real estate to supply chain and things that are necessary to really set a franchisee up for success. And of course, funding and private equity at the back end. What should franchisors, coming from your point of view, what should franchisors focus on in order to attract an individual like yourself to say, hey, I'm going to take a look at this. What should they be doing? And how do they reach people like you? Like, you're not the guy that's up on some franchise portal clicking on things, or maybe you are, I don't know. Share that with us.
Yeah, no. So Gary, let's go take a step back and talk about the industry of franchising in general first. It's a collaboration. It's a collaboration between a simplifier and a multiplier.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The franchisor is the simplifier and the franchisee is the multiplier, right? And here's what that means. The simplifier should be reducing stress, should be streamlining and making efficiencies, right? They should be making supply chain availability better and cheaper. And they should be strengthening and protecting the brand. The multiplier, who is the franchisee, should be going out, scouting locations, opening locations, hiring employees, training employees, and executing the brand standards. So a guy like me is looking for a collaborator that is really focused at being a very good simplifier. Now, when you want to quantify that, you need to be figuring out how I'm and the chain are going to be making more money next year than we did this year. And we have for the last 20 years, we have seen most industries be a race to the bottom in the margins. And the way that you make more money is that you open up more locations, so then you can divide your admin costs down. And we're at the point now, can't do that anymore. So the good franchisors are going to have to figure out how to get margin back into their P&Ls for their franchisees.
Yeah.
Bottom line.
First of all, I will give you credit, but I am stealing that simplifier and multiplier. I love that. It's a great way of saying it, and I will tell you that multi-unit franchisees that we've brought into our brands, into our portfolio, multi-unit, multi-brand, the sort of the reoccurring is said differently. It's cost of entry and simplicity of operation. And I think the added piece that you just mentioned, and I think it's brilliant, is what is the franchisor doing? And we have this conversation with our clients all the time. What are you doing to help your franchisees make more money next year than this year? And if you're not doing that, then you're not doing your job, because that's what the franchisee is dependent upon, because they want to grow their brand. So you've got to come up with, how do I simplify operations? How do I decrease cost? How do I come up with new menu items? How do I market that sort of thing? So yeah, I think that's brilliant.
As an example, in my 12 years with Sport Clips, they've gotten the national contract for my credit card processing fees to drop 3 times.
Yeah,
I didn't do anything. I just had to sign a piece of paper. Now, the reason they're able to do that is because the brand grew, the volume grew, so they had more negotiating power, right? And that's part of the power of franchising. But that's an example where I'm making more money or saving more money than I was 5 years ago on the credit card processing fees.
Yep. That's a great example. That is an absolute great example. And I think from a franchising point of view, again, one of the things we preach and teach is that before we would take on a client, we want to make sure the franchisor understands they need to want more for their franchisees than they want for themselves. It's like raising a kid, not to diminish the franchisee's piece of this, but if I have, as the franchisor, don't want more from my franchisees in terms of their growth, it's not to my benefit. It's not to my benefit.
So last weekend, I was at this wonderful annual event called Genius Network. I'm a member of it.
Yeah.
And there was a husband and wife combo that they've got a really successful branding business, PR business, and they own an ice cream shop. And they're like, we want to franchise it. In fact, the one thing that we want to do is figure out, how do we franchise it? That's why we're here.
Oh, that's easy. Call me.
Yeah. Well, I was like, well, let me give you some numbers. Let me tell you what I would say. So they're like, do you think we should franchise it? Of course, I've never been in the location, never ate their ice cream. And I don't think I personally would get into the ice cream business. I just watch that being so secular. But I was like, here, if a franchisee is going to pay you 6% royalties and probably 4% in ad fund, is there enough margin still? Like your P&L for your location you have right now, is there still at least 15 to 20% left over for the franchisee? And they're like, oh yeah, we're just over 30%. I'm like, you have a franchisable model then. You have a franchisable model.
Yeah.
But I told him this, and this is where I'm going with this. I said, the second you decide to franchise, you're no longer in the ice cream business, you're in the relationship business. And you're in a relationship with the other franchisees, and you're a relationship with the vendors and suppliers for your franchisees, and you help facilitate the relationship between the franchisees and their customers.
Yeah.
So you are in the relationship business. You're no longer making ice cream.
So you could actually do my pitch, okay, because that's what you just did. To that point, what we do when we have a brand that comes to us, we first of all, we don't go out and like look for brands, okay, because that's sort of like just forcing the issue. But if a brand comes to us, the very first thing we do is we get their P&L and we drop it into a model that we have that adds in all of the things you talked about, the fees, but more importantly, also adds in things that are sort of the professionally managed best practice aspects of running a franchise. Like, no, your wife is not going to do the payroll. Okay. You're going to have a professional payroll service. So that's a cost. And, so we put that all in. And if there aren't those right numbers, 15, 20 points on the bottom line, it's not a compelling narrative. Who's going to invest in that? The other piece to it is, you're right. You're no longer in the pizza business or the ice cream business, to use your example. You're in this relationship business. You're in this other business. And if you're not ready to sort of, I call it, cross that bridge, then nothing else matters, because you're going to set the wrong tone. So what I'd like to do to sort of end it up here is you get your last thoughts on, I would love to know your any final thoughts on, if I'm a franchisee, maybe I own one of two of something, what are the things that I should look for if I want to elevate myself? Is it financing, locations, brands? Like, what are the things I need to get really buttoned up on in order to make that move?
Well, I would tell you, every time I've looked at a new brand, I would get on LinkedIn and I'd try to find franchisees, not the list that the franchisor gave me, but just random franchisees, and start asking a couple questions. Let them know who I am, why I'm asking, and just ask if they could share a couple questions. A lot of times I try not to dive into too deep or personal. So I'll just say, is it between this and this? Are you finding it to be between this and this? And if it's not, they'll say, no, it's not. And if it is, they'll say they is. And between this and this means my threshold of what I'm acceptable with.
Right. Great question.
But I would say this, the number one thing, and 10 years ago, this year, I went to the multi-unit franchise conference for the first time. Since I've gone, I've picked up 2 brands. One of those brands I formed with a partnership with another franchisee that I met at the conference. And I've doubled the number of units I have, and it has a lot to do with that conference. And here's why. They're going to have great keynote speakers. This year, they got Jim Collins as the keynote speaker.
Oh, great.
He's doing a workshop too after the keynote. So that's pretty cool. But the other thing is that we have great panels, and the panels have franchisees that are in there doing it and being successful. And it's a question and answer panels typically, but they also have it moderated where there's preset good questions, and they're going to break out. So if you're at that 1 to 2 level, they're going to have a track that's probably going to be for, getting to 25 units. And then there's going to be a track to getting to 100 units and so on. Changes every year, but we do that to keep it fresh. But there's 3 types of people that should go to this conference. They are the people that are in love with their one brand that they have, and they just want to figure out, how do I open up more, bigger, faster, and better of that brand. There's 2. The second one, someone that's got a brand, they're doing great with it. And for whatever reason, like my story, I was landlocked and needed to open up another brand if I wanted to keep growing. If you're looking for another brand, there are 2 days where they have a 3-hour expo where all the franchisors are there. I call it Vegas's best happy hour. It's 3 hours of open bar and hors d'oeuvres. And you can walk around, you're going to run into other franchisees. And then everyone's got a booth. I mean, and you're going to see tried and tested brands like Burger King and Little Caesars there, but you're going to see new brands that you've never seen before. And they're looking for multi-unit people. Okay. And then the third is, I don't want to open any more locations. I've got 3 or 4. I don't want another brand. I just want to figure out, how do I get a district manager to do what I need to do so I can go to Germany for 2 weeks and not have the place burned down. Right. And so all 3 types of those entrepreneurs are welcome there. And you're going to find your counterparts there that have already been there and done that. And you get to learn from them, and they're happy. I mean, when people are successful, they're happy to tell you their failures and their success and how they did.
Yep. And I love that conference.
Multi-unit conference. It's in Vegas. It's March 19th through the 22nd. It's going to be a really good time. I've been going for 10 years. So my wife is pregnant with my fourth. And when I got announced to
Congrats.
the chair, she changed her in vitro date so she could go to the conference and not miss it.
There's commitment.
I know,
That's
right?
that's
She
a
says,
commitment. I
she's
love
like,
that. I love that conference, by the way. You know, there's a million conferences. You can't go to them all.
no.
That's one that I don't miss. I will tell you, as a franchisor or a consultant to franchisors, mostly on the emerging side. And I agree with everything you said. We've actually had some clients exhibit there, but we tell all of our emerging brands that they need to go
And
because
just talk to franchisees.
they need to
Yeah.
understand what multi-unit franchisees think about, what questions they ask, because even though they may not be ready now because they got whatever 4 units or 2 units or 10 units, they still need to understand that the multi-unit, multi-brand franchisee cares about things differently and in a different way than the single unit operator that they're currently sort of marketing to get those first few folks on. So I love that conference. On the Zor side, by the way, Franchise Update Media's Franchise Leadership and Development Conference is kind of the same thing, but it's sort of the other side of the coin. It's franchisor education. So those two conferences, I did miss franchise leadership this past year, but I'll be at multi-unit, so I'm sure I'll see you there. I never missed that one.
My one advice to franchisors with the multi-unit franchise conference, when you're ready to have a booth and display, look at that as a minimum of a 3-year commitment before you really start seeing your return on your investment. I'm going to tell you why. We are all paying attention who's at the conference. If it's a brand I've never heard of and you've got 5, 10, 15 locations, I'm going to wait. And by the second or third year of seeing you there, I know you've got some staying power, because the worst thing I could do as a franchisee is buy into a brand, be excited that there's none in Missouri and I can have all of Missouri for myself, only to find out that 18 months later, private equity bought them out and merged it with another concept. And then that's not the concept I joined, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So the showing that you've got some staying power is going to weigh one of the most biggest things for a multi-unit is just, you're not a flash in the pan, right?
Absolutely. Brother, you are preaching to the choir. I love it. You know, we tell, and I'll leave it here. We tell our franchisor clients, because they all think, hey, I'm going to franchise this year, and next year I'm selling 100 deals, which, first of all, if that's their mindset, we're probably not involved. But we emphasize that franchising is like evolution. Things are happening. Maybe you don't see it, but you have to be working. You have to make things happen, because you need to have that staying power. You need to stay in front of people. We have franchisees that have purchased units in some of our brands that actually came in contact with us 2 years ago or 3 years ago or a year ago. And they were sort of on the sidelines. They wanted to see us grow. They wanted to see other franchisees grow, what was going on, because they're doing a due diligence where it's not about being risk adverse. It's about being smart in terms of the long haul, as you talked about earlier. You know, what's the long game here? What's the far game?
Yeah.
And that's a big deal for us.
And I would give you just one piece of advice when you're mentoring these emerging brands, and the same is going to be true for large unit franchisees, okay, or franchisees that want to grow really big. If you're going to go from 0 to 100 units in a year as a franchisor, you're going to lose 85% of your staff.
Yeah.
Okay, because most people can't handle that change that quick. That doesn't mean that when you get to 100, that 85% of your staff will be gone. If you get that growth over 5 years, a lot of them will stay with you because they can learn and adapt. It's a small percentage of the population that can go from 0 to 100 that fast, not lose their brain, not stress out or start making bad decisions because they just don't have the experience.
You are so right. I've very rarely seen it happen. I mean, I am sometimes I don't want to say the grim reaper. I'll say I'm the party pooper when, I'll read something on LinkedIn. Oh, we're so excited. We sold 400 franchises in 2 years. I was actually at a private equity meeting about a month ago in New York, and some franchisors stood up and said, hey, we sold 393 whatevers in 19 months. And I was sitting in the audience, and I can be a pain in the ass. Okay. So I raised my hand. I said, okay, that's nice. How many units do you have open? And I forget what he said, 32 or 39. And I thought, hey, dude, like, do you have infrastructure? Have you built out your infrastructure? How are you servicing your franchisees? None of those things were in the game plan. None of them. None
Well,
of
and,
those.
and here's another thing. If the founder's goal is eventually to sell this off to private equity and walk off into the sunset, if that unit of sold but not open is really high, you get a devaluation.
Absolutely. There
Yeah.
is, if you go on my YouTube channel, I'll pitch my YouTube channel here. I did a seminar at the IFE in New York at the Javits Center a couple of years ago about positioning your brand for private equity. And the things that were coming up from franchisors, to me, no disrespect to them, were mind-boggling, like not having leases on their locations from their franchisees, not tracking insurance policy, like all this stuff. And I said, all you're doing is you're giving the private equity person who has interest, you're giving them an opportunity to take your 10 or 12 multiple and bring it down to a 7. That's all you're doing. And that's
Right.
not what you want to do. All right. Boy, we could have a whole nother conversation on that. Jesse, if somebody wants to reach you, like, how do they do that? Is it?
I'm very active on Facebook and LinkedIn, and the links to those profiles will be on the show notes.
Yeah, yep. We'll they're usually underneath. So listen, I thank you. I know you and I have had very brief conversations at some of these conferences. We see each other. This is the first time we've ever really endeavored in a deep conversation. I appreciate everything you've said. Your insights are unbelievable. I think people who want to get into franchising or who have a franchise and they want to grow, they should definitely be thinking the way you're thinking in terms of, basically spreading risk, if you will, evaluating properly and doing the things that excite you so that you can continue to grow as an entrepreneur. I've often told people, and I've backpedaled on this at times. I've said, well, to me, a franchisee is not an entrepreneur. A franchisee is a soldier. And why do I say I've backpedaled off of that? Because when I meet people like you, what you've done is you use franchising as the vehicle to satisfy your entrepreneurial plan. Mm-hmm. So I just think that that's amazing. And I look forward to seeing you at, will you be at IFA?
I will be at IFA.
Yeah, great. I'll definitely see you in Phoenix. But again, thank you so much for your time. It's been absolutely fantastic.
It's been an honor to be on your podcast, Gary. Thank you.
Thank you.